Starting out watching baseball in 2006 and being an Orioles fan, I dealt with a lot of hard times during that period. But in 2010, expectations were higher than usual for this team, as because of a mix of moves that the team had made and a lot of the young talent that was either called up or getting ready to be called up, it seemed like the Orioles had a bright future ahead of them. And in 2010, let's just say things didn't go as planned, but the way it ended was almost like a foreshadowing of how the team would be moving forward. So let's talk about what went down in the offseason, shall we? Because this was really the first offseason I remember where the Orioles were going out and making moves. First of all, they brought back Miguel Tejada, this time to play third base though, since Cesar Izturis was occupying shortstop. They traded for Texas Rangers starter Kevin Millwood to give them a veteran in a rotation that desperately needed it, as it was very young. They also got Mike Gonzalez to potentially close out games for them. And they also added some, small deals, like one with Garrett Atkins, former Colorado Rocky, on a one-year deal to play first base. Tack that on to the young talent of Matt Wieters, Adam Jones, Felix Pie, Nick Markakis, and Brian Mattis in the rotation, along with Brad Bergeson and soon-to-be Jake Arrieta and Chris Tillman. Also having an ace like Jeremy Guthrie at the top of the rotation. Things were starting to look up for the Orioles, or at least that's kind of what we thought, but things didn't start out that way. Through the first 54 games of the season, the Orioles had, worst record in the league. They were 15-39, and they finally decided to part ways with manager Dave Tremblay, which Dave Tremblay, as a person, I feel was fine, but as a manager, he finished 96 games under 500, having about 2 half seasons with the Orioles and 2 full seasons with the Orioles, where the Orioles didn't produce a 70-win season during this time. Plus, he never got a managing job after this, so that just goes to show you that maybe he just wasn't that good of a manager. So while the Orioles searched for a new manager, their third base coach, Juan Samuel, took over that job, and he was slightly better. He got to manage 51 games, and during those 51 games, the Orioles were 17-34. So also not great, but they were a little bit more competitive with Juan Samuel under the helm. But that just means the Orioles were 32-73 on August 1st. They were on the verge of having one of their worst seasons ever, and on the verge of having just their third 100-loss season in team history, a feat they hadn't accomplished at this point in time since 1988. It's almost happened to the Orioles a couple times since then, like in 2001 when the Orioles lost 98 games, and even the year before, in 2009, the Orioles with 4 games left in the year were 60-98, but to avoid the 100-loss mark, they decided to win the last 4 games of the year, and they kept that loss total at 98. But the Orioles are just destined to have a terrible season, and just how bad did it get? Well, after losing 2 out of 3, in the opening series against the Rays in Tampa, no big deal. The Orioles were 1-2. The Orioles would then lose 9 straight games, fall to 1-11 before they would win their next game, and then they would lose 5 straight after that to go to 2-16. The Orioles didn't win back-to-back games until their 19th and 20th games of the year, when they won a series finale game against the Red Sox by a run, and then 2 days later, after getting the off day, they went to play the Yankees, and they beat them by 1 run. The Orioles also kind of dealt with a lot of underperforming and injury during this time too. The big prospect catcher Matt Wieters in his first full season wasn't necessarily having the year that everybody thought he was going to have. And even though Adam Jones had been an all-star year before and had a pretty solid year in itself, he wasn't really taking that next step up. Nick Markakis was still hitting very well, but he went from being a 100 RBI man to under 70 this year. And not to mention, the Orioles only had 2 hitters hit over 20 home runs this season. Luke Scott led the team with 27, as was per usual around this time. But the other one may surprise you, because the other one that hit 20 homers for the Orioles is a guy that was a journeyman who was well respected and could play anywhere on the field, and just so happened to be the Orioles' only all-star this year. This is how bad this year was for the Orioles. Ty Wigginton, 32 years old at this point, hit 22 homers, had a great first half, and went to an all-star game, deservedly so, even though I would say that someone like Adam Jones, Nick Markakis, and even maybe Jeremy Guthrie probably deserved it more over him. But hey, when you're a bad team back then, most of the time you got one guy in there, and that was what you had to deal with. But I think the big thing with the Orioles with the injuries was that they had a guy like Nolan Reimold, who had such a good rookie season and a lot of promise heading into this year, come up, and he got hurt and only played in 39 games all year. Garrett Atkins, the veteran that they signed to play first base, not only wasn't hitting well, but he dealt with a lot of injuries and only played in 44 games all year. And I think the big one is that Brian Roberts, their second baseman, who at this point was only 32 years old, and of course, his prime from 2003 to 2009 was so good, he was seen as one of the best second basemen in the game. Well, he dealt with a lot of injury issues this year as well, only playing in 59 games, and when he did play, he hit well, but the thing was, this was about to be the time in his career where he would have trouble staying on the field, and the Orioles tried. I mean, they brought in Corey Patterson, someone who was familiar with the organization from just a couple years ago, and he hit pretty well, stole some bases. They brought in Julio Lugo to kind of play second base because I guess he was really the only option, and they even traded for Josh Bell to play third base. I remember this guy being a big prospect. I thought he was going to turn into something, and spoiler alert, he didn't turn into anything. We also tried the likes of Jake Fox, who had some decent moments, but again was never fully great. And needless to say, these offseason acquisitions, they didn't work. As I had mentioned Garrett Atkins before, and even when you look at someone like a Miguel Tejada, he hit fine and did well, but the Orioles traded him away because, they weren't in a competing mood, so they decided to get what they could, and Miguel Tejada was sent off to the Padres. Kevin Millwood at this point in time was leading the league in losses, had an ERA over 5, although not fully his fault because of the Orioles' lack of being able to score runs, but still, he did eat innings, so I guess that was a good thing for the Orioles. And even the, younger guys in the rotation like Brian Madison, Brad Bergeson, who came up with such promise in 2009, were struggling to begin the year. But they did call up Jake Arrieta, who was pitching very well, so there was at least that going on for them. And Mike Gonzalez was pitching so badly that he had lost his closer role, and the Orioles were flipping back and forth between Koji Uehara and Alfredo Simon as to who was going to be the main closer. But the Orioles stuck at 32 and 73, decided that we are going to name Buck Showalter, a man who hadn't managed in the major league since 2006, to be our new manager. And this move was kind of like, I understood why people were mad at it because he hadn't managed in a while, but you look at his track record for being able to turn teams around, it was also kind of exciting. I mean, he turned the Yankees around in the mid-90s and was fired right before the dynasty took place, but that was mainly because him and the front office weren't seeing eye to eye on things. So in 1998, he goes and he manages the expansion Diamondbacks, who after a 97-loss first season, won just 100 games in their second year, made the playoffs, and yes, they didn't make the playoffs the next year, but they won 85 games, and of course Buck Showalter was unceremoniously fired, and they won a World Series. And even when he managed the Rangers for those 3 years from 04 to 06, they didn't make the playoffs, but they had some pretty unexpected competitive seasons under Showalter. So needless to say, this guy seemed to know what he was doing. He hadn't won a World Series yet, but he was notorious for taking these franchises who, one was an expansion and the other two were kind of, down in the dumps at this point, and turning them into, a team to be reckoned with, a team that people didn't want to face because, hey, we know they're going to fight hard. And, well, let's just say, starting on August 2nd, the Orioles went on a run that I think might have saved the franchise big time. The pitching started to come along, as that ended up being probably the best aspect of the Orioles during this 57-run stretch with Buck Showalter as manager, as, again, Jake Arrieta continued to learn. Jeremy Guthrie started to get more run support, and a 3-10 start turned into an 11-14 record with an ERA under 4. Brian Mattis started to pitch very well. Things were just starting to go in the right direction. And even the offense still wasn't great, but it was fighting day in and day out, and there was just some magical wins for this franchise. And the Orioles under Buck Showalter, in his first 9 games, went 8-1. So all of a sudden they go from 32-73 to 40-74. Still, in the basement, but hey, baseball's fun again. And that's 32-73 record turned into a 66-96 record by season's end, which again, obviously is bad, but considering how it started for the Orioles, and especially nowadays when you start that bad, very rarely do you see teams go on stretches like this where they're able to avoid such a disaster. The Orioles were able to take the talent that they knew they had and have it come together and do things, and they started to play like a team, and it was exciting baseball again. And this worked so much that the Orioles decided Buck Showalter is going to be the manager moving forward. And in his first year in 2011, the Orioles made more moves. They only won 69 games, sure, but the offense was highly improved, and hey, they still had a lot of that young talent that they were hoping would come together, including drafting a young 18-year-old shortstop by the name of Manny Machado. And in 2012, well, that's when things changed for the franchise. The team won 93 games, made the playoffs. I'm not going to go too in-depth with that because I've already made a video on this team, but this was the year that Baltimore baseball officially announced its return. And from 2012 to 2016 under Buck Showalter, the Orioles experienced 4 winning seasons, no seasons under 500, a division championship, and 3 playoff appearances, and they were the winningest team in the American League during this 5-year period. No team had more wins than the Orioles, making it their most successful 5-year period since, the mid to late 70s. Of course, things ended very badly in the Buck Showalter era, but needless to say, when he came up in 2010, the franchise was looking even in a worse position than it was before, but he turned it around and changed it like his track record always seemed to do. He always just seemed to come in, get the best out of his players, and he was so good with his strategic ways of doing things. It was almost like he was doing things the way baseball runs now before these kind of statistics became so huge and big, and I think that's what had him ahead of the pack to every aspect of the game. Now, did he ever win a championship as a manager? No, and of course after the Orioles, it took him a little while after he got fired in 2018. He would then become the Mets manager in 2022, but would only last 2 years there. They would make the playoffs his first year and then kind of falter his second year. But now I think he's kind of officially retired because he's done his due. It seems like every team he's managed has had some sort of success along the way, but he will forever be known as that manager that was able to get everything out of the guys that he had. He just had trouble winning the championship. But to me, Buck Showalter is a Hall of Fame manager because you could have put him in any situation and he would have made it work, and within a couple of years things would have been a whole lot better than the gloomy outlook that these teams had before. So even though the 2010 Baltimore Orioles started off very badly, that finish would kind of tease what the franchise would be moving forward. Sure, it took another year before they actually started winning again, but the competitiveness of the team and the way Buck Showalter ran things and did things, that was kind of an early preview of what was to come. And of course, as I mentioned, from 2012 to 2016, there was a lot of fun moments in Orioles history and stuff that I never got to experience before, like a division title and the playoffs. Now, if we can only get to the World Series and win it, I would love that too, but I mean, we're very close to that. We have a different team, obviously, and a manager who I feel might even be a little better than Buck Showalter, but that might just be me. I don't know. People's opinions on Brandon Hyde seem to vary, but I like Brandon Hyde a lot, and I think the Orioles are much closer with him to winning a title than they were with Showalter at the helm. But again, that's just me. I'd like to hear in the comments below, what was this season like? I mean, I know as an Orioles fan it was very weird, but toward the end it became fun again because you're like, no, at least we're being competitive. We're playing spoiler here. Like, it was actually like fun to watch. Like, oh, we can win games now. We found a way to play and win games. Like, it was just nice to see. But overall, what was it just like to have that start of a season and be so miserable, to the hope in the future being so bleak, to it just kind of turning around so quickly like that. Like I said, I don't think I've ever seen a run from a team that started that bad to finish that good. This would be like if the White Sox, after their 21-game losing streak, went on to win like 20 of their next 25 games and got to avoid the inevitable. But obviously they didn't do that. But I'm saying that's basically what it would be, where, after the White Sox lost 21 straight games, they're like, oh, they're going to break the record. But then they just go on this tear of just wins, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, hold on, they're putting that on hold. They might not break the record here because of this streak, because now they're figuring out a way to play baseball. It was just so weird to me and so unusual. And the only time in an MLB season I think I've seen a team use 3 different managers. Granted, one of them was an interim manager. You knew he wasn't going to stay, but I've never seen another team use 3 managers in a season, especially ones that all managed over 50 games. But that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and until then, I will catch you all in the next one.